Welcome inside the 17th episode of the Albums Only podcast. My name is Alan Beavers. Alongside me, Jacob Slater, and we today are going to talk about my favorite rap album of all time. I think it's wonderful and unique and unlike anything else that you can possibly imagine or that I can possibly imagine. We're talking about Dr. Octagon and the album Dr. Octagonecologist. It's a work by Kool Keith, the rapper Kool Keith, formerly of the Ultramagnetic MCs. Also the work of Dan the Automator Nakamura, and actually also includes some scratching by DJ Qbert. Sir Melanik also does some guest vocals on the album as well. It was produced by Cutmaster Kurt, famous rapper, DJ, hip-hop artist. A great album, and I want to go ahead and get talking about it. Slater, I love this album probably in ways that are not wholly rational. And I think it's because when I first heard it, I didn't realize that rap could do this, that it could be this weird and bizarre and surreal. And that's how I was drawn to it. And this album came out in a period where gangster rap was all the rage. And it's towards the end of the gangster rap era, but not completely. And this was an underground smash hit. And I'm curious about your experience with Dr. Octagon and your thoughts when you first heard it.
Well, let's see. I first became aware of Dr. Octagon probably in high school. High school was the time when not only was I a hardcore flower child, I guess, very into the 60s and 70s rock and roll stuff. It was a time when I was really kind of starting to get my feet wet in alternative music. And specifically when we're talking about hip-hop, the kind of major influences, the gatekeepers into the world of rap for me were the Gorillaz. Demon Days released when I was in, I think my sophomore year or something, and that was incredibly influential on my future music tastes. It kind of introduced me to groups like De La Soul when I went back to the Gorillaz' first album, Del the Funky Homo Sapien, MF Doom. And the second album was The Mouse and the Mask, which was the Adult Swim themed collaboration between Madlib and MF Doom. So kind of like my first major interest in rap and hip-hop music. I had always kind of been familiar with rap music. Obviously, I grew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, the time when rap music was really becoming a major commercial force. You know, you had DMX and 50 Cent and Eminem. But my first real introduction into hip-hop, when I first began looking into it, was with alternative hip-hop acts like De La Soul and MF Doom, and later on, Dr. Octagon. And it was a phenomenal album. I gotta say, I had never heard of Kool Keith before that. I had heard of Dan the Automator, as he had worked on the Gorillaz' first album, and he worked with Del the Funky Homo Sapien on their another landmark alternative rap album, Deltron 3030. So, you know, Dr. Octagonecologist was a strange thing because it wasn't really like straight rap music. There wasn't like this, to me, like this kind of mythology built around, or kind of a culture built up around it. It was just a island in a lonely sea. And that's kind of how I found out about him, was just straight up going deep into the alternative rap circles. Once you got your foot wet, obviously Dr. Octagon wasn't far behind.
What's really interesting to me about Dr. Octagon, I honestly don't remember how I first chanced upon that, to be honest with you. When I was much younger, I was deep into the throes of allmusic.com, which has this page which says influenced by, later influenced, sort of proteges, the links. And so I would spend a lot of time on that website just clicking around and learning as much as possible. And my guess is that somewhere along the way I heard it there, but I never got the feeling of listening to Dr. Octagonecologist. That album, the first time you listen to it, at least the first time for me, I sort of sat in raptured awe. Because there's like a perma-smile on my face because I can't believe it how absurd this is. It's a completely absurd album. And there are really three parts to the album to me that come through. There is this sort of sexual, sexed up, hyped up Dr. Octagon. There is the second part of the album, which is bizarre extraterrestrial wackiness that's inspired by scatological terms and absurd technology like fax machines and doo-doo pistols. And just, it's so surreal. I didn't know rap could do that. I didn't know rappers did that. And that stuck with me. It struck me. And I never, so to speak, I never recovered after. I always wanted to experience that again and again. And that's why I keep coming back to the album. That's why I love it so much. Every time I hear it, I'm sort of back in that state of being enraptured and hoping that I'll discover something new in it.
I was familiar with the works of Dan the Automator before, obviously. So Dr. Octagonecologist musically seemed familiar to me, but the way Kool Keith raps on this album was, and still is, unlike anything I had ever really heard before. It is, so much of this album is kind of based on this science fiction and horror B-movie kind of theme to it. But it's really the way Kool Keith raps, the way he rhymes, I think, is what really brings home the alien nature of this album. It's, you know, when it comes to alternative rappers, the three main ones for me are Del the Funky Homosapien, MF Doom, and Dr. Octagon. And those three rappers each have like a certain idiosyncrasy, I think, that I always really like. Del is a traditional style rapper, but the way he rhymes is almost like an elastic band. He'll stretch out some rhymes, and then it'll stretch back, and he'll just blast you with something. MF Doom will, or I believe he's just known as Doom now, he has an idea of what he wants the verse to sound like, and then he'll like stuff words or deconstruct words in order to make them fit his meter or his rhymes. And Dr. Octagon, on kind of the more famous songs, it's almost like a counter rhythm. You have the bass beat going on, and then you have Kool Keith rapping, but he's not rapping to the beat. He's rapping a completely different beat that sounds completely off kilter to what is actually going on in the song, which I always found fascinating. It reminds me a lot, really, of, and we were just talking about this before recording, it reminds me a lot of Trout Mask Replica, Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band's famous, I believe, 1969 album.
Fascinating comparison. I mean, I never really thought about it that way, but now it does seem like he's rapping to a completely different beat or time signature. It feels like he's completely out, and yet that's what makes it work, because he's adding his own beat, in a sense, his own rhythm over top of what's already there.
It makes it sound very odd, and much like how it did with Beefheart singing in Trout Mask's Replica, where he's singing half a beat to a full beat before or after the music comes in. It's a similar feeling to what you feel on Dr. Octagonecologist, is this sense of wrongness, I guess, this sense that things aren't really matching up or adding together, which works for this album.
So we should go ahead and just go a little more into actually the construction of Dr. Octagon. Dr. Octagon is often thought of as Kool Keith, that is the rap name of Keith Thornton, a former member of the Ultra Magnetic MCs, a very popular and famous group that began in the 80s. Kool Keith, fascinating character in and of himself. I mean, this is a guy who's went by several different sort of personas, which only add to sort of the reverence for him. He's also known as Black Elvis. He's also known as Dr. Doom, and several others. And that's what makes him so fascinating. he's not afraid to take on these musical characters and to play them out. And that's why it's so great to see him succeed here. And he succeeds here. Originally, he put together things with Cutmaster Kurt, legendary producer and rapper. In 1993, he put together 2 tracks that are on here in the Dr. Octagon, well, somewhat title track, Dr. Octagon and Technical Difficulties, another great track off the album. They were put together, and then they were sent out to a bunch of people, and Dan the Automator Nakamura was one of them. He heard it, wanted to be involved in it, got in touch with them, and then he began producing the album. Also brought into the equation in a really wonderful way that you really don't hear much in rap, particularly anymore, and that's with scratching. There's some wonderful scratching on this album, and that's done by DJ Qbert, a famous scratcher as well. So this is a real all-star cast of great music minds coming together in one form or fashion.
Definitely taking from the past and also people who would go on to even greater things in the future. And something that interested me when I was looking at the kind of creation of the album is that not only did you have turntablists and producers, but there was also a lot of musicianship, instrumentation going on in this album as well. If you read the liner notes on the album here, it mentions Dan the Automator not as a producer necessarily, but also playing violin and keyboards, which I thought was very interesting. And people like Kurt Cobain playing the clarinet and flute, not the famous Nirvana frontman, but Burt King Kong on organ and piano, which really just kind of heightens the comparison to Trout Mask Replica, as Captain Beefheart and his Magic Band always had these kind of weird names to them, like Drumbo and Suithorn Rollo. It's interesting to me to see rap and hip-hop albums that feature instrumentation. I feel like I always thought of that as like an alternative rap thing, because I always considered rap to be a sample-based musical form. Obviously, you had musicianship with the rapper and the turntablist and everything, but it wasn't until like maybe the Roots or the Beastie Boys that I started thinking of rap music as a performable by a band.
Yeah, I love what the Automator says about this album. He says, hip-hop was always inventive. Then the 90s hit and everyone wants to be Dr. Dre and no one wants their own thing anymore. Everyone now wants to have the Lexus and deal pounds of drugs. We don't do that. That's not our lifestyle. You don't see us coming out with fur coats. There's more to music than that. And that's a great way to put it. And the more to music is... it's just completely out there. I mean, it is completely sort of crazy in its own way, and that's what I've endeared myself to, and I think you too, Jacob, have. Let's go ahead and actually get into the album itself. It starts with a pornographic song. It's called Intro, and this is one of the themes that I think is throughout Dr. Octagon. It's one of those things. Kool Keith wanted to work on sort of a sex-themed album, actually, after the Ultramagnetic MCs fell apart. And you sort of see that here in Dr. Octagon. There is sort of that pornographic thing going on here as a skit. What's interesting to me about that, though, and you'll see that run throughout the album, people might be turned off by that. Now, maybe you are, and that's fair enough. But I think the thing that makes it so different, though, is that this is clearly a character. It's clearly an act. And I think that sort of transcends any misgivings that certainly I would have about it, but I think that other people will have about it as well. It just sort of opens up the album, setting the tone in this sort of absurdist way, and then it goes into the track 3000. Jacob, your thoughts on Intro and the track 3000?
I've always found it interesting just how much rap music and alternative hip-hop and all that utilize skits and kind of non-musical segments in their albums. It seems like, from artists like Ice Cube and Method Man to artists like Dr. Octagon and Deltron 3030, there's always kind of moments on their albums where songs are kind of intercut with these skits. And sometimes they're comedic, sometimes they're just adding to the atmosphere of the album.
Well, that's a great point, and I want to put this out there for people. De La Soul is actually credited with being the real progenitor of the skit, of popularizing that and really passing that on. Fascinating bit of history, but yeah, that generally accepted that goes back to De La Soul.
It's something that you don't really see in rock music, at least not since like the 1970s when you had progressive rock and rock concept albums. Rock music kind of moved beyond that. Rap music kind of embraced it. And Dr. Octagonecologist is definitely a concept album about this character named Dr. Octagon, who in this intro shows how he feels about female patients. And then later on in the album will show you what he likes to do to patients who aren't female. But very interesting. Usually we have songs that kind of perfectly introduce the album, but this is entirely an intro. Moving on to 3000, it's much like a lot of Dan Nakamura's work. It's got a really good kind of night feeling to it. Makes you want to kind of drive through a street at night and listen to this stuff. And it's the first song to me that introduces this counter rhythm rapping that Kool Keith does on this album.
Yeah, what I find fascinating too about this is I think there's a very minor theme too that's sort of at the beginning and end that tie everything together in a different way, which is this idea of sort of rap and the transcendence of rap into the future, from the past into the future. One of the last songs, I think the actual last song on the album is 1977, sort of an ode to when rap began. And then at the very beginning here, the second track, the first real song, is the year 3000. You see the rhyme there. Rap moves on to the year 3000. So it's this bridge in between. The album sort of is also a bridge in between the past and how Kool Keith is a part of that past, and Cutmaster Kurt. Everyone's sort of part of that past that he's in line with. And then he is also, and Dr. Octagon is also taking rap to the year 3000, into the future, not only in the space sense, not only in the galactic sense, but also in terms of the style. This rap style is completely different than anything that you would have heard in 1977.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of makes sense when you think about it. When you think about what this song is, which is kind of rap from the future, it kind of makes sense where to see Kool Keith's kind of counter rhythm rapping, because it definitely seems like, well, what would rap music sound like in the year 3000? Well, probably something kind of weird to our ears. So in terms of matching the concept, because this is a concept album, it actually kind of makes more sense now when I think about it, why he did that. Because he's playing a character. He's rapping as if he was an alien rapping.
That moves on to I Got to Tell You, which is another skit, but this is my favorite skit, so I want to talk about it. To me, this just starts the absurdity of Dr. Octagon. You have sort of this classical music background, and you have the good doctor talking about how he does rectal rebuilding and relocating of saliva glands, and he takes care of chimpanzee acne, and of course moose bumps, and you can reach him at 1-800-PP51-DOO-DOO. And then at the end he says, I'm in your corner. And then you got some beautiful scratching that takes you out. It's such a short song, but this just, I'm smiling now just thinking about how absurd it is. I love it.
Yeah, it's really dumb, but I really love how dumb and kind of juvenile it is.
Yeah.
He loves the word doo-doo, I think.
He does.
He brings up doo-doo so often on this album.
I have to tell you something. There's something about Kool Keith. He talks about like damaging rectums so much, and he's so obsessed with that sort of thing that like I would never mess with Keith Thornton because just how much he talks about that scares the hell out of me.
You know what he's going to be aiming for if you ever step up to him.
That moves on to Earth People. And I love this. This has a really buzzy, like saw-like synth over top of it. This is absolutely one of my favorite tracks on the album. This is one of the earlier ones done as well. And it is Again, we see the doo-doo pistols. This is a reference to the doo-doo pistols. There's another great part here where he rhymes, "My skin is green and silver, warhead looking mean, astronauts get played like a ukulele." He talks a lot about what Dr. Octagon looks like, and then this sort of interplanetary dialogue. "I'm psychedelic this time, come in rainbows. Look at the green lights and y'all see my brain glow. 5 colors, yellow, black, and red, and green, and purple." Which is just, again, the visual too is truly psychedelic as well.
Yeah, you got that good synth riff going on there. You got this very light piano kind of flourish in there. Reminds me a little bit of like something you would have heard in like a track by RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan. Gives it a very kind of menacing atmosphere. And yet this is a song that I really like as well. Just because, I don't know, looking at the lyrics here, he's going in so many like weird directions, but at the same time he's kind of adhering to the classic rap themes. Like he's still saying how much better he is than you know, which is like the staple of rap music, but he's also like almost Dada-esque imagery. Like first patient, pull out the skull, remove the cancer, breaking his back, chisel next for the answer, supersonic, bionic, robot, voodoo power, Equator X, my chance to flex skills on Ampex.
Yeah, that's great. Just the way that the sort of syllables even that sort of pop out from that. I love it.
The first two lines kind of rhyme, and then he just like forgets that he's trying to rhyme at all, and he's just like spilling words out. Like I don't know how to explain it, but it's like it doesn't sound like it should go with the music, but it's got its own flow to it, and the way he just kind of connects words together is always fascinating to me. This is like one of those songs where I think it really kind of shines, the way he is able to take such bizarre words and be able to construct them in such a way that it makes amazing music.
So that moves on to No Awareness featuring Sir Menelik, also known as Chewbacca Uncircumcised, which also makes me laugh hysterically. There's some great stuff here by Menelik. I like his rhymes here as well. No Awareness, good chorus. It's a little more understated than what you hear on Earth People. And again, I think it just it continues the themes that we've heard before. I love the line, "Ask Copernicus about pushing limits." There's also sort of pushing, again, that science, space, these themes into the forefront here, which always interests me. Also, the next track after that is Real Raw, which sort of, again, continues those fuzzy synthesizers, and then we also get some great scratching here from DJ Kubert. I think it just continues the album so well. Again, it keeps that tone steady, it keeps everything going well.
Before I had kind of studied this album, I didn't know that Sir Menelik had performed on this album. It doesn't even mention it in the kind of Wikipedia page for Dr. Octagonecologist that he performed on this album. It's interesting to me. It's a kind of very quiet song, at least beat-wise. And the way that they rap on this song, it's almost like they're not attempting to rap. It's more like they are speaking, or they're like performing poetry. Reminds me a lot of the future will not be televised, or the revolution will not be televised. It's not so much like rap as it is beat poetry. Also features, I believe, one of the first kind of non-rap references on the album, Watch You Jam Like Awtecker. I believe that's how it's pronounced. Who I believe are a electronica band. It's interesting because I remember when we were first talking about doing this album, you mentioned that he dropped a reference to Kurt Cobain, which you wouldn't think would happen, even in the 90s when you had stuff like Run DMC working with Aerosmith or Public Enemy working with Anthrax. It always kind of seemed like worlds of rock music and rap music were separated from each other, and there wasn't really any overlap. So it's interesting to me to see kind of these non-hip-hop references kind of being sprinkled in across this album.
I love the opening line. With yellow eyes, my green face, my pink and white afro, I'm no toy kid. Your style is made by Hasbro, which is just wonderful. And it describes how crazy Dr. Octagon looks, which I just love.
I mean, earlier I was talking about no awareness. I haven't even gotten to Real Raw yet.
Yeah, this is what happens because there's so much to digest.
Very good song. Another dark one. Beats kind of remind me a little bit of Cypress Hill. No Awareness was kind of like a poetry performance in the way it was performed, if I'm remembering correctly. Real Raw is much more traditional in that it's not kind of the outer space counter rhythm stuff in 3000. He's much more kind of traditionally focused on rhyming and a kind of more traditional meter. Of course, there's still great lines like, "You be there like Michael Jackson in my atmosphere, gerbils for rectums, I break you off like Richard Gere."
Yes, that's the other great one, yeah.
"I'm so fantastic, your metal fist is still plastic, compelled with no threats, your rhymes bounce off my shield, New York City, California, roll my Ampex reel." Another reference to Ampex, and another mention of New York City and California, which he references in Earth People, which I guess is continuing the kind of the concept of this alien man known as Dr. Octagon. Really good, and features some great scratching by DJ Qbert by the end there.
Absolutely. We move on to another great skit called General Hospital, where the good doctor deals with a patient who has cirrhosis of the eye and proclaims, "Oh shit, there's a horse in the hospital," which has to be one of the best non sequiturs on the album.
Like, fuck it, he's dead.
Yeah.
Oh shit, there's a horse in the hospital.
I mean, you just don't see any of this stuff coming. And then it's only 26 seconds long, but it's great. It's perfect. And then it moves right on into what is arguably, I mean, if you had to pick one song from this album, you almost have to pick Blue Flowers. This is a great track. I mean, this track, there's something about this beat. It almost seems as if it's just dripping with THC. It is just an absurdly memorable track. Features some great sort of scratching that sort of brings out the lyric, "Let me show you something." And it's sort of repeated quite a bit throughout the song. I don't know what to really say about it. This is just the song on the album that, like, if you pick one song to remember, you're going to remember this, Blue Flowers. It's a great track.
I believe Earth People was the first single, but Blue Flowers eventually followed up. But I think in terms of name recognition and kind of familiarity, I think Blue Flowers is far and away the most well-known song on this record. I think 3000 does a great job of kind of introducing you to what Kool Keith is doing on this record. And Blue Flowers, I think, does a fantastic job as well. It kind of builds this bizarre B-movie science fiction vibe through its music with this high violin sample. Puts you in this paranoid, surreal mood. Features actually some bass guitar work by Kool Keith, which I found interesting. It's just like it really captures, more than really any other song on the record, I think, what Octagonecologist was about. Just kind of strange beats with a guy doing strange lyrics in a strange way.
Yeah, I think the beat is just so disturbed in a way, and that's what makes it so recognizable off this album. From there, we move into Technical Difficulties. This is one of the first tracks that they put together, that Cutmaster Kurt and Kool Keith put together from this album. Features a great line that I want to talk a little bit about. That is, as Dr. Octagon walking through a polygon, he's big on rhyming octagon with polygon. My first impression was to give patients a lesson. Who's the best to put me to the test? I'll battle ultramagnetic, my own self as well. So I love the idea that, like, he has to go up against the best, he has to face the best, and he and the group he was a part of are the best, and I'm not afraid to even take them on.
The thing about this album is, which I think a lot of people seems like they forgot, was Dr. Octagon was a character. This was an album about a character. Kool Keith was kind of performing this character, but he wasn't Dr. Octagon. It is made clear on this record through this song and others is that Kool Keith and Dr. Octagon are separate. But unfortunately, a lot of people kind of still conflated the two to the point where he released a song around 2000, somewhere in the mid-2000s, where Kool Keith as Dr. Doom kills Dr. Octagon.
Twice. He did it on 2 separate songs, actually.
To kind of put it to rest that Dr. Octagon is a character for this album specifically. But it is very good song. It's very tight, I think, well created. And this is the first record that mentions Kurt Cobain, and it's also the first song on the record to mention Roger from Zapp, which was a kind of electro-funk band of the early 80s, kind of similar to The Time. It just seems like a weird pull. I know from Dr. Octagon you shouldn't expect normality, but like just getting a pull like Zapp seems... I can understand Kurt Cobain. Nirvana was big in the 90s, but not many people are talking about Zapp.
Also, Ampex again. You get your Ampex reference, which you love so much, also comes back around.
I love references. It's the main thing.
That gives way to a visit to the gynecologist, which is sort of another sex-based skit there. It's one of the longer ones on the album, nearly 2.5 minutes.
Yeah, kind of a creepier one too.
It is pretty creepy, but again, it's just credited, by the way, to Nakamura as the writer. So this is generally all.
We know what Nakamura is like now, I guess.
The Automator means something different than we imagined.
Oh God.
That gives way to Bear Witness, which is really interesting. This really actually sounds like a late 80s, early 90s song. The bass guitar, which I assume that Kool Keith is playing, is sort of at the forefront here. You really get that coming through really well here. It's a fine song. I like it. There's really, for me, I wouldn't go into it too much. Your thoughts on Bear Witness? Yeah,
it's just like a simple drum and bass stuff. I think there's a little bit of clarinet sampling in there. A lot of turntable stuff.
That's a great point. There is a big drum and bass, but there's also like a certain, at the beginning, I don't know what to call it, but there's a certain like hip hop style that's more reminiscent to me of the early 90s, and then there's the sort of drum and bass breakdown at the end. It's a little different than any other track here in a lot of ways. To be honest with you, it's probably one of my least favorite tracks of the album, but it's still completely listenable. Like it goes along quite well with the album. That gives way to Dr. Octagon, the song Dr. Octagon, which was created much earlier than the album was released in 1996/97, depending on which label you want to go with. This one also features Sir Melnick. This is a great one as well. I really like this track. It's just out there, man. I don't know what else to say about it. I think it fits. The title fits really well on here. And again, it's one of the 2 tracks that's credited to Cutmaster Kurt.
Kind of the first of the 2 faux live songs on this record. Other one being the last track, 1977. November 6, 1996, at the Great Western Forum in Inglewood, California, Dr. Octagonecologist and Chewbacca Uncircumcised performed with Kurt Cobain and Roger from Zapp. What is this obsession with Zapp that Dr. Octagon had?
and Kurt Cobain. I love the idea of that being like a dream team for him.
Really interesting song, kind of drum and bass focus, I think. A little bit of strings come in and guitar later on. Features some of the kind of weirdest lyrics on the record. Just mentioning a few that I like. Earth-ending trilogy's wacky stuff like gas-passing dinosaurs while I stroll in circles blindfolded. Gave a lady scream at a rat poop. You might just laugh so hard your skull cracks. Brain spills thick blood shooting out like a champagne cork. Some really vivid and bizarre imagery on this song. And that's just from Sir Menelik. Kool Keith does it too. Back in Spiral, I roast humans like a gyro. New York, Atlanta, Africa to Cairo. Good stuff. It's very kind of more traditional stuff, but it's so Trout Mask Replica stuff.
It is. But the outline, I love the very last line. Radiation butter pouring down your sinuses. It's Dr. Octagon. I mean, excuse me. That's the last line of Octagon's rapping. Oh, no, it's not. There's more. There's so much here, man. These lyrics just keep going. I forgot how crazy it is.
The cartoon Donald Duck is given fellatio on the floor with Reed Richards looking at the Thing's naked pictures. taking X-Lax to relax with the needle and thread, sewing up all the other butt cracks. In the industry, there's no one who can mess with Dr. Octagon, now serving coleslaw and pink pickles. What are you doing, Kool Keith? I don't know. I love Kool Keith and I love MF Doom, but you gotta wonder, do you guys sit down? Like, what do I want this breakfast about? Donald Duck, yes. Fellatio, that's good. I need something else. He spies a Fantastic Four comic. I've got it.
Have I used Roger from Zapp again?
Not enough Roger from Zapp references. Like, the label's really pushing for it. I don't know. For some reason, I've always assumed that rap music is a more improvisational form of music than rock music, because there's so much importance given to freestyle and kind of rap performances on the fly that I could always assume that when they do like weird stuff in their lyrics, it's like, oh, well, he's like doing it improv. He's just pulling stuff off the top of his head. It makes sense. But no, I think these guys wrote this stuff down and they were like, yep, this makes sense. I want people to hear me say this on a record.
Oh, man. I need a minute. But see, this is what I'm saying. It's like, when I hear this and I hear those lyrics, I have the same reaction. I'm like, again, the perma-smile on my face. I'm laughing. I'm having a good time. That's the connection that I have with this album. That honestly, I rarely get when I listen to music. Like, I'm going to have an emotional response. I rarely have a response that is this comical. And that's why I love this album so much. It's, you don't get that anywhere. I don't get that anywhere else, I guess you could say. The next track is Girl, Let Me Touch You. Again, that sort of continues the sexual theme that is sort of underlying Dr. Octagon as well. I just won't talk too much about that. Move on to I'm Destructive. This is interesting. It starts with its skit and goes into this sort of revved up guitar. That's where Kool Keith just repeats, I'm destructive. These sort of continue the mood, but there's really not too much here to really point out for me. Your thoughts on these two tracks?
Well, Girl, Let Me Touch You it's not one of my favorite songs, I'll admit. I kind of like the more low-down jazzy feel to it. It's kind of like the ballad of the album in a lot of ways, I suppose. The more traditional idea of what a rap song should be. I'm Destructive reminds me a little bit of a song like Looking Down the Barrel of a Gun by the Beastie Boys off their 1989 album Paul's Boutique. Kind of has this heavy, almost metal beat going on. Kind of gives it a darker, a more destructive feel to it. I like how creative he gets with how petty he can be in this song. What would you do if I hit your face with dog doo-doo? Smear purple flies on your forehead, spit in your salad, vomit on your brother's breakfast, take your ass outside, burn your mother's house, bring pet mice, and scare your sister with my gray mouse. I like how just juvenile it is. And also, it's another song where you get a lot of kind of music references. We all hang with tickets for Van Halen, Gorefest, Autopsy, Def Leppard, and Spaz. Come on, drop the jazz, Grateful Dead, rock with it. It's very interesting to me because this album was given the term psychedelic a lot in kind of music reviews. But I don't know. Do you consider it a psychedelic album? Because for a long time, I didn't really.
That's a great question. I'll be honest with you. I guess I don't consider it psychedelic because I have certain connotations with psychedelic, right? And I assume you do too. I mean, we think about psychedelic rock and roll. I think we have a particular sound. I don't consider it psychedelic. I consider it surrealist or absurdist. Those are the two words that I would throw out there for that I really don't consider. I really don't use those words to describe much else musically with the same connotation here. Because I think absurdist and surrealist, there's nothing in the rap game that I've heard, and I haven't heard. I've heard far from everything, so don't get me wrong here. But those words are much better describers. I wouldn't necessarily say psychedelic. It's not what hits my mind, no.
Although, just going from like this song, you definitely see that he references a lot of different bands, I think.
Right, it's understandable. It's completely understandable, but I personally wouldn't.
And this song actually features 2 mentions of the word doo-doo. Hit your face with dog doo-doo, and also checking out doo-doo on flame pits. Just like it's a really dumb song, but I really like it.
Elective Surgery is the next track. Another skit about how incompetent and purposefully Dr. Octagon is. I think I like the lines, "You have bees buzzing around your rectum, and I can't stop the blood." And of course, you need a bad operation. Not you need an operation badly. You need a bad operation.
Did you skip Wild and Crazy?
I did skip Wild and Crazy. That's another one where the bass comes through quite well here. This one sort of falls in line with sort of the middle of the album, which this one sounds a little Cypress Hill to me. There's some piano accents again. Serving them well. I stopped their anals up with pickles again.
He loves the pickles too.
He loves the pickles.
Hey, I can't blame the guy. I love pickles too. Musically, I think this reminded me a lot of kind of the rap where I started off, the Gorillaz and Deltron. I think it's like a classic Nakamura-style beat. Actually, I ended up putting it as one of my favorites on this record. I think it's got a really good beat to it. I really like how Kool Keith raps on here. It's very kind of weird, and it's got some great Hubert scratching on there. So going back to elective surgery, he loves the idea of bees flying around your rectum. Don't know why. He loves rectums. He loves rectums and doo-doo. I feel like if Dr. Freud were still alive, he'd have a lot of things to say about Dr. Octagon. And moving on to half shark, alligator, half man. Yeah, kind of really weird. Actually features an opening taken from the movie Cabin Boy. And apparently Dan the Automator loves the movie Cabin Boy, starring SNL alum Chris Elliott. I can't tell you why. Only Dan can tell you why he loves Cabin Boy so much.
So what I love about this song in the opening is you have met the dangerous 208-year-old uncle of Dr. Octagon, Mr. Gerbic, half shark, half man, skin like alligator, carrying a dead walrus.
Check it. Yeah, so he's not half shark, half alligator, half man.
Right.
He's half shark, half man, with skin like an alligator.
An alligator. So half shark alligator, half man. So like a quarter shark and a quarter alligator and half man.
Yeah, just really confuse everybody with it. Just don't make it easy at all to understand. But great song. Really lays it on thick with the B-movie atmosphere. Got some really great kind of strange imagery.
I love this line. In my real world, orangutans dance for Thanksgiving with skeleton bones and skunk tails is my mission. Holding backwards raps to all my power packs, baboons clap and girl horses want to hit the sack. We're too bold for ocean waters, monkeys sniffing ice. I mean, just the imagery. Again, it's surrealist. That's sort of why I keep bringing that word up. I mean, you see those images. It's like a Dali painting. Or what you would imagine, Salvador Dali would do. It's just out there.
Yeah, just to drop some rhymes of my own. My vomit fluctuates, covers your skull like protoplasm. Lightning bugs turn pink on my tongue, catches spasms. Green elephants, I battle streets with a zebra. My mechanism is more than Dion's psychic voodoo. African bees, snakeskins, colder spit through you, my medical passes. You can't see with greedy glasses. I don't know. I've said so. I can't keep repeating it. I just love the way he paints a picture with words in such a way.
And so that moves on to Blue Flowers Revisited. And this is sort of like a, I don't know exactly what's the word I'm looking for, Jacob? It's sort of like a reprieve back to the previous track. I mean, I think they knew at the time how good Blue Flowers was, and so they sort of do like a coda to it here at the end. It's an interesting
like a
little
re-rise almost.
Yeah, like a rewrite, like a remix, re-rise. I'll be honest, I don't know if it's necessary. It's fine. I like what they're doing here. I just don't know if it really fits on the album so much. And that sort of makes sense because it doesn't look like that was originally on the first release of Dr. Octagon on bulk recordings in Mo Wax edition?
Personally, I actually kind of flip-flop between whether I like Blue Flowers or Blue Flowers Revisited the most. Just because, I mean, Blue Flowers is a great song. It kind of encapsulates the persona that Kool Keith was going for on the record. Blue Flowers is a lot more grounded song in a lot of ways, and it's kind of a more chill song as well. And you got a little bit of like flute going on in there. And Kool Keith is kind of not going counter rhythm. He's more just straight up like rapping and rhyming. Although he still goes into weird stuff, of course. But there's just something about it I find calming. It's a much more chill song, and that's kind of like why I like it so much.
Yeah, and it leads into Waiting List, which is also kind of a chill song that I like mostly for the vocals that continue to describe just how debased and deranged the Doctor is. A sprinkle of Clorox in their vocal box, some Pepto-Bismol, Pepsi-Cola, pack of Pop Rocks, mix it all together with bugs to change the weather. You be coughing blue with eyes like Mr. Magoo, straight up cartoon, you're bound to fall out real soon.
This mentions that it is the DJ Shadow / Automator mix. DJ Shadow was another person that I was very interested in, kind of in my formative years getting into alternative hip-hop. Introducing was
great album.
An amazing album.
We'll do that one day for sure.
Yeah. It's another one of those songs that kind of reminds me a little bit of what RZA was doing on 36 Chambers, kind of that drum and piano, quiet kind of music, but got some great lines as well. And a really great way of performing them, too, I think. Watching people vomit green, my leg is lizard pills, my office in Burbank, I hide the bodies in Beverly Hills. Seeking Kimbles and Bits, a girl with small tits talking to herself or dog and having rabid fits. And I really like that he's able to do the kind of classic rap form of saying why he's so better than you, while you be coughing blue with eyes like Mr. Magoo, straight up cartoon, you're bound to fall out real soon. Great imagery, going into these weird directions, but still kind of carrying on the traditional attack-based rhyming tropes, I guess.
So that leaves us with the final track of the album, 1977. And again, as I stated previously, this sort of ties in with the beginning in the year 3000. It's sort of a classic hip-hop beat. There's not a whole lot else to accentuate what's going on here, and that's because it's, again, trying to tie together the past and the future. Dr. Octagon, Kool Keith himself, cannot help but reference doo-doo yet again, even on a song called 1977. So that's going on here. But this is the thing, right? He's mentioning, too, in this rap, he's talking about Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, battling Kool Herc and the Herculoids, Africa Bambaataa, and the Mighty Zulu Nation. It's sort of, again, paying homage to the past, to those that have come before him in a way. I really like that. I like how that album ends. I like how this album ends, and I like that is sort of the past is given its due. I think it's really unique, and it really feels like it completes the whole in a way on the concept album.
Yeah, like 1977 is not Dr. Octagon. This is Kool Keith just himself laying down rhymes, which is pretty interesting. There's always, throughout this album, there's kind of like this conflict between Kool Keith, the rapper, and Dr. Octagon, the rapper. So it feels right to kind of end the song with Kool Keith doing not only a send-up of all the kind of classic hip-hop pioneers, but kind of doing it in a way that feels like a live DJ set back in the day. Reminds me a little bit of Live at PJ's off the Beastie Boys album Check Your Head. Just kind of getting this live feeling and kind of a live reaction to the song. Yeah, it's a really fun way to end the song, or end the album, I should say. Just Kool Keith just dropping rhymes and showing you why he's so great at it.
So, in years since, there's a fascinating little subplot here. In 2002, 2003, the production company One Watt Sun, and this is sort of getting into gray area here, tried to release a follow-up album called The Return of Dr. Octagon. The degree to which this is legitimate is highly dubious. This was something that, even though it was released, it's not really in good standing, and it's often considered that the album sort of hurt the reputation of Dr. Octagon. Thornton himself actually stated that he liked the album, but sort of his rap performances on there, only some of them are actually legitimate. It's very sketchy there what happened with that album. Dr. Octagon, as Kool Keith, did actually appear legitimately also on, fascinatingly, a a.k.a.'s album, Mosquito, and the track Buried Alive. So there is continuing history of Kool Keith playing around with the character of Dr. Octagon in other releases, but still there is no official follow-up, one that would take into account the Automator and DJ Qbert and Kool Keith himself.
Yeah, it's a bit like how I mentioned earlier that I always considered Octagonecologist to be kind of an island in a lonely sea, in that all you really need from Dr. Octagon is on this record. It is a perfect statement unto itself. Revisiting that or trying to go back to it and do all this other stuff never really rings true with me, I think. There's just certain albums that, like Deltron 3030, even though they put out an album over a decade later, I think, it's just not the same. It's just, there are just certain albums that kind of exist on their own, and they just have such a mythology built upon them. They're just such amazing records, such distinctive records that you can't really try to build off of them. Dr. Octagonecologist is, at least for rap and hip hop, I think definitely one of those records that you just can't touch.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I'm glad that we got to talk about it because its stature continues to grow by leaps and bounds. I think nearly every year it gets more well known, particularly as hip hop and R&B and rap become generally more mainstream and more accepted. This album gets more and more recognition, and it deserves to because it's so unique. I really love it so much, and we are going to be back next week to talk about a decidedly different band, Echo and the Bunnymen, the album Ocean Rain. We're going to have a lot of fun with that one. Jacob, any thoughts that you want to leave us with before I take us out?
Just that if you were a bit like me and weren't really familiar with hip-hop music and rap music, or you had some kind of presumptions about rap music that, it all sounds like gangster rap, it's all this Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Tupac kind of stuff, and that's why I don't want to listen to rap music, take a listen to Dr. Octagonecologist, because I think this album, not only is it one of the best hip-hop albums, I think, in a long time, I also think it's a great gateway rap album.
Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at albumsonly. You can email us if you so prefer at albumsonlypodcast@gmail.com, and we'll see you guys next time.